Coming up
or
soon.
or
And I'm
yeah.
gonna keep myself muted so it doesn't go blasting through to everybody watching.
I'm glad that worked out, Al. It was easy peasy, and I was just on my way home. So
Okay,
We're
so
live,
that
Hudson.
we're live. Excellent. All right, I'm gonna hit record on back in Zoom. All right. Gary Sharlock is entering the room. All right, so I think we are pretty much rolling. I'm gonna go to speaker mode. Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody's face. To this November. It's pretty rainy and dreary and cold here in Portland. I don't know about everybody else. Hopefully some people have some good weather today. But we're going to do open Q&A. We got a number of announcements, some kind of special previews for people that happen to be here about stuff that's happening in the store over the next week and a little bit of workshop stuff and this and that. Rick, do you want to, and we'll also talk just a little bit about creative visioning and a few things along the way if we have time with all the questions. So,
creative
Rick,
visioning, okay.
like we've been working on this big project for On One
Yeah.
actually, and we'll maybe talk about that a little bit too.
Well, first I'll talk about the next office hours we'll do will be the 17th of December. Um, and it'll still be general Q&A. I thought maybe, people wanted to, when they submitted their question, they also submitted their favorite piece of gear they got this year. Doesn't have to be big. It could be something small, but something that made your life as a photographer a little bit easier. And you should also start thinking about your favorite image from this year in January, early January. We'll do an office hours with a gallery for best of 2024, um,
We'll
that's
probably
always a fun thing.
probably
I'm going
throw
to
out a
try
little.
and do something a little differently this year with respect to the submissions and presentation and stuff like that. We've had some issues with stuff in the past, so but I'll talk about that on the 17th. Um, and I think that's it. I don't have a date for the January office hours yet. It'll probably be the first Tuesday in the month, though. We want to do it
Right.
early in the month. You're going to Baja, right?
I am. I'll be
Yeah.
kite surfing with the crew and family in Baja in early January. So we'll work it around that. I would just say to everybody, go through your images and find your absolute favorite from the year, something that's meaningful to you and share it with us. And we'll probably wind up picking a few and throwing out a little bit of free gear here and there to ones that really stand out to us. So we'll have more details about all that in the next office hours in December. So got any other general announcements, Rick?
I don't. The Scotland workshops will probably go live later this week. People who are on the notification list for those should get an email. I sent a first email out to alumni who are on the notification list, and I will send a notification to everybody later this week. I'm working on Brookings and Rainier workshops, and I've got to get them posted because I'm going on vacation. So all of those should be posted before Thanksgiving. Um,
Right.
so, and
Yeah. I
that's
would
about
I
it.
would say I would say quickly on that workshop front that if you're here and one of those sounds really exciting to you, a Southern Oregon Coast workshop or a workshop on Mount Rainier or having an epic journey in Scotland like we just had, let Rick know that you're fascinated by it because we do have lists of people that are interested. So
Yeah, I would say if you're interested and you have not already filled out the form on the website, if you're interested in one of those three workshops, Scotland, Brookings, or Rainier, just send me an email, rick@hudsonhenry.com. So,
I'll try turning my mic down a little bit, Paul. Hopefully, I don't know. Maybe I sound okay to you, Rick? Somebody said I sound like I've got too much bass.
yeah, you sound a little scratchy.
A little
So
scratchy. Yeah.
that seems
Mm,
better.
okay. I think it was maybe just a little overamped. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. The other announcement that I'll just do a couple little quick store announcements. We're adding a few things to the store, and they're happening this week. One is the Naya Evo 50 sea bags have finally arrived, and I have a pretty good stock of
Yes,
those.
yes,
Some
they
of them like a
have.
year. Yeah, my whole garage is essentially filled with Naya Evo boxes at this moment.
I just got
And I
that
haven't
picture in
started
my head.
shipping those. I haven't started shipping those yet, and I'm about to put them up on the website. So just kind of keep checking back. They're going to pop up there, but I do intend to announce them on Thursday in the video, along with sort of a holiday gift guide and stocking stuffers to cool stuff for photographers. Also, among all that, we're going to add 49 millimeter case filters. And just like the 82, 95, 112 kits, we'll have all of the neutral density sizes, UV, circular polarizer, night filters, you name it. But they're kind of adorable. They're very, very small. This is actually a whole mega kit. There's 6 filters in this little thing. And my one disappointment with it is that their mega kit still came in the big 82 millimeter case, and they just disappear into this thing, and it doesn't serve any size in your bag. So I'm working with Case. They're going to redesign a smaller case, so to speak. But I did find this cute little guy for $9 on Amazon that I'll link that holds them all really nicely. And the cool thing, the reason for 49 really is how many of us are loving these Leica Q cameras, the Q2, the Q3, the original Q, the Q43, and all of them took 49 millimeter filters. And the UV goes right onto the magnetic adapter under the hood, no problem. And I've tested it out, and you can stack two neutral density or a circular polarizer and a neutral density in there, no problem. With the camera's lens corrections, I'm not seeing any vignetting to speak of. And with 3, it's pretty minimal. Looks like it could be correctable. So for those who have the Leica Q, it's a really nice way to protect your camera. I'm also going to start carrying threaded UV filters just for all of your lenses general protection. Case came out with a really nice new MCUV3, and they're affordable, they're bomb proof, they're really, really durable, they're easy to clean, they don't collect dust like some other filters. And so I'm going to be listing those on the site really soon too. But
Hey,
all that stuff is in the store. I'll go ahead with.
your audio is really just kind of wonky. Are you going through the same?
As usual. Hmm. Let's double
It's just
check.
you're really muffled. It's almost like you're blowing up your levels in
Yeah,
some way.
overdriving maybe.
Try that. That ain't better.
No,
Uh-oh. What's going on?
it's actually worse.
Worse. Well, that's weird. So guys, hold on. Let's just. And how
Sounds like
about
an
now?
impedance mismatch.
That's
It sounds like an impedance mismatch, and I do not know how you did that.
uh, oh, actually, currently, I think I'm dialing it the wrong way.
There you go.
So
That's a little better.
is that sounding better? How are we doing now?
That is that is sounding better.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my fault, guys. Technology, the joys of technology. All right. It all goes through a switcher. There's so many potential
Sorry to
issues.
derail you on that, but
That's okay. That's okay. I will show you really quick, just for anybody curious, if you run over to my site and you go into gear, if you go into filters, and I'm working on making this all simpler. We've added 49 millimeter, and you can see all of the stuff right there. So 82, 95, 112. That's how to kind of browse that stuff. Also, one announcement is that on Thursday, the 11th, Case is doing giving us the ability to do 20% off the mega kits. So all the mega kits will be, so 49, 82, 95, 112 will all be 20% off through December 2nd. So if anybody was interested in buying a kit, don't buy it tomorrow, buy it on Thursday. So, all right. That's enough salesy stuff. I hate that stuff anyway, but little special announcements. I think people have been waiting a long time for the 50C backpacks, and those of us who have them love them. So,
Yeah. Yeah. All
all
right.
right.
Anything else that you want to?
Well, for those who are using on one, Rick and I have been just working around the clock the last couple weeks on a cool big photo kit and video training course for using PhotoRaw 2025 and also just perfecting your landscape and travel photography. We've also got everything shot for our organizing course for Lightroom Classic. So we're working with multiple software platforms on training courses that'll be launching very quickly here. Um, and anything else, Rick?
No, I think that's it. I think that's it.
Popping in here.
Yes, Rob, the 50Cs will fit in carry-on.
Oh
I
yeah.
took
The
mine.
60C fits in carry-on. If
Yeah.
it says
Yeah.
C, it fits in carry-on.
Yeah.
I have
So,
carried the 60C from the US to international flights to little tiny Costa Rican planes. Obviously, if you get on a puddle jumper that you can't fit it into the overhead, you wind up potentially pulling your removable camera insert out and sticking it into the seat in front of you. But that's one of the nice things with Naivo is that's four little Velcro tabs and boom, it's out. And you can stick the zip around cover behind it and it's like a bag with a handle and shoulder strap mount points. So it's very simple to do that if you need to.
all right. I've got actually a couple questions on filters, and probably should just start with those. One, our good friend Bruce Wagner said he just bought a used 14 to 30 for his Z6 III. And he's worried, he says if he gets the case filter set for 82s, will be much vignetting in the corners. Do I have to bite the bullet and move up to the 95 millimeter kit?
And I can tell you that's why I carry the 95 millimeter kit. I didn't for a long time. I carried 82 and 112. And then so many people were complaining that 82s vignette so badly with the 14 to 30. And then the 180 to 600 came out that takes 95 millimeter filters. And it just made sense to start selling 95 kits. So I would absolutely recommend if you like using filters with the 14 to 30, like neutral density, yes, you should buy the 95 kit and just adapt. Yeah.
Okay. And then Steve Thompson asked about, he said he's curious about case clip-in filters. He says he's thinking the night filter might be the answer because they've not come up with a 112 neutral night filter yet.
I
Do you
have
recommend the clip-ins?
I have a whole slew of 112 neutral night filters downstairs ready to ship. They're in my store. They're always in the store. They're also included in the mega filter kit. Case has been making 112 neutral night filters since they started doing 112 filters. So that's, but I don't particularly like the clip-in filters. I find them a pain. It's almost impossible to get them in and out without fingerprints all over them. It's just tricky. You know, you got to turn off your sensor shield and use this little suction cup thing, which often makes marks. I mean, it's a white glove suction cuppy kind of an exercise. The one application I could potentially see it for is night filtration, but still I'd just much rather have a slip-on, clip-on magnetic external night
Yeah,
filter. Yeah,
yeah. The
I
clip-ins
tried.
are
I tried. They're just a pain.
yeah, yeah. And I did use on my 14 1.8 the Astro lens. Sony made you could use rear filters and had a little clip-on thing for it. And that was, you're not putting it in the box. You're literally just putting it on the back of the lens. And those actually work really well. But it's the same
Yeah.
thing. They're very small.
Yep.
Really what you want to do is you want to put it on when you go out, just so that you're not going to be going in and out of you know, opening the camera up. But
I'm
they're not,
I'm
they're
I
not really
would
useful beyond very specialized applications.
agreed. I would much rather work with a clip-in filter that goes on the back of the lens than one that I have to dig into the sensor box and place just right in front of the sensor and get sort of stuck in there just right so that I feel like it's secure and then close the camera down and put my lens on. And it just it's not fun. It's
Yeah.
basically like cleaning your sensor every time you put the filter in or take it out. It's this really sensitive, like playing the game of operation inside your camera. So not my favorite.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Paul said he's reading very different takes on white balance and using auto versus daylight to capture the actual look of the scene. He says, I know you promote using auto, but have you considered using daylight 5500K? I've been trying it and I tend to like using daylight to capture as the eye sees it. But I'm sure there's cases where you want white to be white.
You know, white balance, different cameras have different tendencies to be a little warmer or cooler. Different settings have different tendencies. Nikon's gotten so, nuanced with white balance. You have daylight white balance, you have daylight auto, regular auto. You can adjust them warmer or cooler to set your preference. And I just find that it's daylight auto when I'm outside is great. Regular auto running around a city or indoors is really really good, and it's so easy to switch in post. It's as simple as just grabbing that white balance slider or clicking auto or grabbing an eyedropper and clicking something white and adjusting it a little bit warmer and then syncing the images that you shot at the same time contemporaneously with that. Auto works really really well for me. I mean, the only time I really set a Kelvin white balance like you're talking about 5500 is situations like right now in here. I have color temperature balanced lights, and I hold a whiteboard up and do a custom white balance, which is like, I don't know, 3900 Kelvin or something, because everything's tungsten in here, and get it looking just right. Sometimes if you're doing, like, I photographed this young snowboarder who's also, his dad was a pro kiteboarder and kiteboards with me, and he's amazing at all these sports, but he's on the US Olympic team at 16 for snowboarding, and he's got all these apparel brands that sponsor him, and he needed just green screen shots of him wearing different apparel. And so when I had him trying all these different jackets on my porch in indirect light, but first I had him hold up a big gray card and shot him holding the gray card, and then I shot him in auto white balance wearing all these outfits in the same light. And when I got into Lightroom, I white balance clicked the gray card, and then I synchronized white balance through all the photos I shot. Everything's perfect. um,
Yeah.
so if it's critical to you.
Darren, what were you going to say?
Oh, I know there's a couple of arenas when I'm doing basketball photography or something like that, where the light can be kind of weird, especially off of the court. And I just find a
Yeah.
white spot on the floor to just make that the capture it in camera and then set that as the white balance, right? I don't necessarily even need a gray card to do that. But it goes from things being kind of really orangey, depending on what the lighting's like, to
Yeah.
being more like how things actually look in real life. So it's one of the ones where you have to just kind of know where you are, right?
100%.
I mean, if you're doing RAW plus JPEG, yeah, you probably want to set a white balance for those JPEG shots, because it's a lot harder to sort of change things after the fact there. I mean, you will adjust the image, but RAW, it's not going to matter that much.
Oh, I think your pro sports shooters and AP stringers, they're getting a white balance for everything they do, because they're shooting those JPEGs out really fast over the
Yeah.
wire.
Yeah.
100%. They have to be right. Yeah. But the
Um,
cameras are getting good.
yeah, they are. Paul asked if it's okay to keep the revolution or the pace filters stacked against each other. Says, does it impact the magnetics?
No, you mean like when you're storing them?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
God, no.
I store my 3 neutral density together. I leave the polarizer alone.
I
But yeah,
mean,
no, it's fine.
there's also the stack cap sets, like this is the whole mega kit for the Leica, the 49mm mega kit. I don't have a back cap on it, but you could stick the back cap from the stack cap sets. We carry those for all the sizes too, and just stick it in your bag like this. And the
Well,
magnetic caps,
I put it in a protective pouch, but yeah, that's how I do it.
yeah. But I mean, there's no reason not to use that. And you just peel it apart at the part you want. I want a 10 stop, that's red. Click, stick it on, it's like,
Great. I just didn't know if the magnetics might be over long term.
it hasn't for me over years now. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
worry too much about it. Yeah. So yeah, in fact, in
Okay.
this case only has 4 main pockets. So I have my polarizer or UV filter, whichever I'm not using, and the front cap, and then two filters stacked in each little slot, because two filters stacked is about the same size width as a traditional filter. So this bag's made for traditional, thicker, standard filters than the magnetics. So it just works great that way.
Right. Got a couple of lens questions.
Mm.
Let's see here. Joe Lucas is talking about shooting panos and say, I'm currently using a 24 millimeter lens for panos. Any advice on editing another one? Which one would you do? 35, 50, 85? Um,
When you and I were in the Dolomites with David, we saw
mhm.
that just epic scene where the clouds were sort of separating. We could see the mountains through them, and this it was, bright. And we hopped out and we kind of ran to this spot where we could get a really good vantage point of them. And I had the 100 to 400 because it looked like it was really
Yeah.
just sort of an extractive landscape. These peaks in the mist blowing through,
Hmm.
and we were a ways from the car. And so we're shooting that, and all of a sudden there was a cloud gap and it lit up and there was fall color in the foreground. And all I have is a 100 to 400 and the car's quite a ways away. And I put it into manual mode, turned off my auto ISO, figured out sort of the base exposure for everything, and shot 3 rows times 7 overlapping HDRs, actually firing a bracketed burst, three frames, 3 stops apart. Bap, 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 bap. And I got a nice pano handheld with the 100 to 400. There have
Yeah.
been situations. I remember being in this just spectacular spot, climbing Denali with the film crew when I was working on this film crew. And it was such a beautiful place in the 14, or it was the 11,000 foot camp. And I did this panorama of camp that was 360 degrees with the 14 millimeters. The sun was up high, everything was kind of evenly lit and super blasty white with just a couple little puffy white clouds. And I just swung the whole thing 360 degrees, walking around the fluid head while I did it. That was the first experience where I was really working with the fluid head. I argued for a ball head, and the film crew, we had such tight weight constraints. We all shared a fluid head. And that was when after 30 days of shooting with the fluid head, there was no way I was ever going to go back to a ball head. So, I was just like, I am done with ball heads. I see no use for them after this. But I'm like, these are for panoramas. You don't even need anything extra. So I shot that whole, 360-degree thing at 14 millimeters with, lots of overlap, like I advocate. And it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite panos. You can shoot a pano with almost anything if you follow the general principles of staying level as you sweep, and keeping your exposure even and overlapping a lot. The other big thing about panoramas and overlap is that when you think about a lens projection and what the sweetest spot of your lens is, it's the center of the projection, right? So if you hold your camera vertical while you're sweeping it, you want to be assembling the panorama from those central projections of the lens. You don't want the distorted edges, right? So having lots and lots of overlap, I advocate throwing up a rule of thirds grid, keeping your level. And the way I handhold panoramas is I have the level active, so I can see that I'm level with the green line. And then I look at that rule of thirds grid intersection, and wherever a point touches something in the landscape, a cloud, or where the edge of the meadow is on the mountain in the distance, then the next time that next rule of third line comes over and touches it, I shoot it again and keep it level. And then I look for another thing, and I keep moving so that every time one of those rule of third grid points touches the same thing, I shoot, and that gives me 66% overlap. You can easily junk a frame if a bird flew through, or you shook and didn't have a nice steady shot, or something went haywire. But also it lets your panoramic merging software take the center, sweet, least distorted portion of the projection and assemble the whole panorama from that. So I think you can
Whatever
use
lens you
any
want.
lens you want. Yeah, you can use a
Yeah.
14 millimeter lens. I think that 20, 24 is a pretty sweet spot in general. I shoot a whole bunch of 28 millimeter panoramas these days because often the only camera I have with me is this amazing little Leica Q3. and
Yeah.
it's 28 millimeter fixed lens. So that's what I have, a full frame 28. And
I got a
often I
couple
see,
of yeah, I got a couple of great panos in Scotland with the 43, the Q3 43. I
I
mean,
shot a Canon with the 43 I like there too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. You can shoot a pano with any focal length. And I'd say if you've been shooting 24 for a while, try something at 70 or 100, and then try something at 14 if you've got an ultra wide angle. Just remember lots and lots of overlap. Stay level, lots of overlap, all the same exposure.
all right.
And no polarizer. No polarizer.
Yes,
The
yes, never.
polarization really ruins a panorama.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want polarizer on any lens wider than 20, I would say. You know.
I mean, yes and no. If you're in a foggy, wet
Yeah,
wood,
yes,
it
but
cuts
but
reflection off the leaves. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But yes, if you've got blue sky and no, you don't want no.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So continuing on the lens beat, John Marone asks, why do we have the need for prime lenses when shooting street, architecture, landscape? And the fact of the matter is these factor lenses, at wide open and low light, we sacrifice focus. Everything I read suggests shooting a fast lens of 5.6 to f8 will get best focus results. Why do I need a 35-1.4 if the best landscape results are at 5.6 to 8?
I mean, if all you're interested in is everything being in focus, then you don't. It's
Yeah.
true. Some of the best street photography that we saw or that we've seen from a workshop participant was Tony in Cuba. Not to disparage anybody else who was in Cuba, but Tony did magnificent work with his 24 to 120 on the Z9 in Cuba. And he used auto area autofocus with eye detect. And he did no look shooting all the time. Whatever the closest subject was to him, he knew the eye was going to be in focus. And he shot a lot at f5.6 f8. He was you don't need that fast prime. Where you need the fast prime is if, like Rick and I, you love to shoot dark streets at night.
Yeah.
If you're out there in, like we were in Venice, shooting streetscapes in almost no light, street
Yeah.
lights here, street lights there, then going wide open with a 51.0 is sort of a dream. You're able to stay at like
Yeah.
800 ISO and get, 2/3 of stop underexposed on the street at night, get subjects, and it's a different kind of photography. If you're shooting architecture, I sure the 14 to 24 is a great lens for that.
Hmm.
Just make sure you give yourself plenty of room to do some perspective control. And if you're shooting a panorama, start way wider, and that's a great way to do actually architectural work is shoot a panorama and go way wider so that you have room to do perspective control after the fact with the resultant panorama to kind of fix the keystoning and
Hmm.
distortion that happens. Um, Zoom lenses are wonderful. The quality of the f4 glass that Nikon's making for the Z system, I consistently say and 100% believe, having shot it all and owned it all, is better than the 2.8 glass that existed for the F mount system. It's just
Yeah.
insanely high quality, almost no chromatic aberration, almost no focus breathing, sharp, right to the corners, wide open. It's crazy. It's crazy what they're doing with lens design, and the shorter flange distance and wider opening are making it much easier for the engineers. They don't have to bend the light rays so much. Um, so I mean, I started out my photographic career shooting almost nothing but zooms, and slowly over the years have fallen in love with primes. I did a video recently where, my favorite lenses, and I had all these people hitting me up via email and YouTube comments saying, well, you didn't include the 24 to 120 or the 100 to 400, and you're always talking about those lenses. And it's sort of like, I'm a guy who likes old Porsche 911s, and I have an old Porsche 911 in my garage. It's not the car I drive all the time. The Subaru Outback that my family puts tens of thousands of miles on. But there sometimes are lenses that are so good for the purpose that they're made that they're just special, and they have a special look, they have a special feel, they feel great in your hand. It's like you love to use them, and they're a lens you'd have a hard time imagining ever parting with. And this manual focus Voigtlander 51.0 is definitely that for me. The lens on the Leica Q3, it would be hard to imagine not having with me. And
Yeah.
that's so easy and small and light to carry. We have another question about the Q3. I'm sure we'll get more into depth about that a little bit. Why are a Nikon and Sony shooter so in love with this little Leica camera, this fixed lens Leica camera? And I think pretty much everybody else who we've convinced to get one feels the same way about it. Um, so there are just sometimes a prime is an amazing tool if you just sit back and use it a bit. And I would argue that primes tend to be sharper through the focal, uh, a good quality prime, you know, at f2.8 is going to be sharper than the zoom lens at f2.8.
Yeah. In
And
general.
it gives you, and it in general, and it also gives you the ability to open way up. And you know, it's a 50 1.4 or even a 50 1.0 if well designed is significantly smaller than a 24 to 70 2.8, and
Yeah.
it lets me shoot many orders of magnitude less light, you know. So
Yeah. I love the
thing.
primes. I mean, I started
Yeah.
when I started with my Nikon FM back in the day. You know, all I shot with were primes. You know, the 50 AIS 1.8.
Mhm.
You know, I think I had a 24. Remember what what its range was, but there's something about them, and you know, I fell in love with the 50 millimeter 1.2 Canon prime lens back in the 90s. It was such an amazing lens, or the early 2000s with the D30 and then the 5D. But the autofocus was so rudimentary back then that it was a really hard lens to shoot with, you know. And now shooting with these 1.4s, Sony makes some beautiful 1.4s, 35 and 50. And with autofocus, it's nuts. It's really nuts. Um, I,
Yeah,
I I can't imagine getting rid of these lenses.
Nikon's 50 1.2 is also amazing. It's beautiful. It's just big for me.
Yeah.
And the 50 1.8 is a wonderful little lens. I mean, it
Hmm.
is small, it's light, sharp as can be. The out of focus rendering's beautiful. Autofocus is snappy. That's one thing I'd say is if you haven't really worked much with prime lenses, think about picking up, you know, a 50 1.4, 1.8. You know, the 1.2s are a massive, you
Yeah.
know, especially the
And expensive.
autofocus. They're inexpensive, but you can get an inexpensive 50 1.8 and just play around with it and sort of see what the deal is.
Yeah. Well, and I think the wonderful thing about the primes, especially sort of the quote normal, you know, the 50s and the 85s, is that it makes you work differently as you shoot. You know, you have to, you know, without a zoom, the great thing about a zoom is that you can sort of zoom in or out to get the composition you want from where you are. With a 50 or an 85, you've really got to work your scene a little bit more. And it makes you think more about composition.
It does.
You know, it's a great tool for practicing, you know, that sort of stuff.
Or, you know, we said we'd talk a little bit, sort of a little bit out of our creative visioning part of the course that we just put together. One of the things we talked about is like ways to think about getting out of a rut. You know, if you're feeling like you're kind of doing the same thing over and over again, that 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 putting a fast prime lens on and limiting yourself to that really interesting way to push yourself into new boundaries. So
Hmm.
Hey, Hudson, related to that 50 that you were just showing off, what's your preference? Throw on a neutral density or with your shutter speed to keep it from being blown out?
well, on the ZF, if I get into bright daylight situations, I just stick a three-stop case ND filter on it. Just click, just put that blue one on there. Because I'm shooting it on the ZF primarily, and the ZF has a max shutter speed of a 4,000th of a second. So it winds up being a little bit limiting. You can't go to f1.0 in really bright daylight if you want to just really, you know, make your subject stand out and blow the background to smithereens like you can with that lens. So I do find myself with 1.2 and 1.0 lenses and even 1.4 lenses in bright daylight, depending on the camera, throwing three stops of neutral density on or a polarizer sometimes. But three stops of neutral density is usually pretty nice on a 1.0 in the day. And then the Z6 III has enough shutter speed capability and still has that manual focus subject detection that makes it so fun to use this lens that you wouldn't necessarily need it all the time, because I think it goes to like 16,000th of a second. So you get those, get what, 2 extra stops, which could make the difference.
Mhm.
It's so fun. I don't know if anybody doesn't know about it. The new Z52, the Z6 III. I'm pretty sure every new Nikon camera coming out will get this incorporated, and I wish they would make it incorporated into the older cameras through firmware updates. Maybe they will.
The
They get
manual
this
focus.
subject detection,
Yeah.
and what that means is when you slap a manual focus lens on or turn the autofocus off on one of your autofocus lenses, you'll still see the subject that you've chosen pop. If you got humans, you'll see humans' eyes. If you've got animal, you'll see animals' eyes. If you've got vehicle, you'll see vehicles, headlights, and front ends. But usually it's people, and you'll see their eye, a little box. You'll see a face or an eye when they get closer. You'll see the little box draw, and you can use the left or right arrow to pick which eye, and whichever one's the highlighted eye that's being tracked, you can focus, and then the box will go green when it's in focus. But better yet, you can program, like I like to, the OK button to zoom to one magnification, and you don't have to move a point anywhere. You don't have to use the joystick or the D-pad or anything. You just push the OK button, and the eye that's being tracked leaps to full frame. All you see through the viewfinder is the eye, and you focus to where it's sharp, shoot, you go back to the full view, recompose, shoot, 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 and everything's razor sharp. It's like cheating with a manual focus lens, particularly something like a 1.0 manual focus lens that's hand holdable like this. It changes the whole thing. The minute I read about that capability in the ZF, I ordered the 51.0 because I had reviewed it, loved it, and found it difficult to focus on the Z. I think I was using the Z6 II and the Z9, and it was a little tricky, to make sure that everything was right. You had to zoom and move the view around and get it focused, and by that time, moving subjects are gone. With this ability to track an eye and keep it tracked and focus it while it's doing that, and then just shoot, it's just crazy. It's a whole new world.
Yeah. All right. I got one more lens question and then we'll move on to some other stuff. This one from Walt talked about doing close-ups of flowers and candid pet portraits. And he's talking about, will the 135 Plena give me more magnification at minimum focus distance than the 85-1.2 at its minimum focus distance? Do you
And
think
what
that
did
the
we do?
Plena,
Oh, sorry.
do you think the Plena will yield similar bokeh to the 85-1.2 for portraits?
Well, okay. So what and regarding the magnification, what did you and I do when we saw this question, Rick?
We looked it up on the internet. The
Those
Plena
lenses
has
that I
a
thought the Planet wins hands down on magnification. It's got a 1:5 magnification ratio at close focus. And the
eight
85-1.2 is a 1:9 or 1:9.1 or something. 1 to
1 point.
9.1. Yeah. So it's almost twice as much magnification with the Planet. It probably focuses a little closer and then it's longer to boot. Um,
Yeah.
the
The
Planet
Plena
has
is
the most.
an
Go ahead.
amazing lens. The Plena
Oh,
is an amazing lens,
yeah,
but
we
it's
had it in
also a
stock.
hard lens to use all the time,
It
you know?
is. Yeah. It's magnificent. It actually has the best bokeh if you want to go with, classic definition of beautiful bokeh. The Planet hard to beat. It has, even in the corners of out of focus rendering, are these perfectly circular, clean balls of light.
Hmm.
Whereas, the 85, like a lot of other lenses that I love, including this 51.0, things start getting a little football shaped, particularly as you get out towards the edges. And I don't mind that. I think it's also beautiful. But the Plena has that, like, multi tens of thousands of dollars cinematographic or
Yeah.
cinematographer style, perfect round out of focus elements.
Okay. Um, Bill Mitchell asks about focus shift shooting. So not really a question, but I'd love to hear about your techniques for focus shift shooting and the Z cameras and things you consider when deciding to use this technique. And I think some of this is is applicable to any camera you use.
I, you know, I tend to use focus shift shooting, the built-in focus shift shooting, on in the Nikon system more for more macro type applications.
Yeah.
You say I want to limit it to 25 frames with a 2 or 3 on the step width, which tells you it's going to just barely move focus a little bit at a time, little slices, and then it'll stop. You focus on the closest thing and you set it loose and it shoots at 25 frames, and then you hit play and you see, well, what part of the scene was in focus? Well, did it get everything that I wanted in focus? If not, run it again, take another 25 frames. You can blend all that stuff in something like Helicon Focus.
Yeah.
When I think about landscape, more often than not, the way that I do it these days is just make sure that the closest part of my scene is in focus at f11. Maybe take a test shot and have my focus point out at infinity and shoot that close focused section and then focus and shoot infinity. Before I do any of that, though, I'm going to take a photo of my hand and then take the close focused shot and then take the distant focus shot and then take a picture of my hand. Otherwise, in post production, even if it's the next day, how are you going to tell which set of images were the focus shifted shot unless you're looking at them at 100%? It's really, really hard to tell. I think focus shift shooting is the most important of all the types of shooting that we do to mark what you're doing for yourself in the grid later when you're reviewing
Yeah.
images. And in some situations, maybe, the light's low, you want a better ISO, you want to shoot it at a slower shutter speed, or you want to shoot at a wider aperture, maybe even more than 2. If you're on the tripod, you can focus foreground, midground, background. But I often do focus shift shooting handheld these days. I'll get the foreground, I'll focus a third of the way and shoot at f11, play, zoom in, check that everything that closest to me looks like it's sharp and in focus, good enough. And then I'll move the focus point without hitting the back button focus. I'll move the focus point over infinity and I'll shoot, focus, shoot. Shoot my hand, shoot, focus, shoot my hand. So, less with the Leica, but with the Nikon, if you have back button focus set, then touching the shutter shouldn't affect focus at all. You get your focus set to where it's good, shoot your hand, shoot so the foreground's in focus, touch the focus button because it's preset over infinity, and shoot again. You got it all at f11. It's a really cool little trick for shooting focus stacks handheld in the field if you're just a little worried about whether you're going to have everything in focus or not, expanding that focus. And that's easy to blend in Photoshop. So,
Yeah.
or Helicon Focus or whatever software you want to use, but Photoshop does a fine job with that.
Okay. Bill Moore asked, is there a lab or labs you recommend for those who haven't invested in a printer yet? Calibrate my monitor, very familiar with soft proofing and ICT paper profiles. Any recommendations?
Um, I like Bay Photo if you really don't want to do your own printing. They do a magnificent job. They're very professional. If you understand their system, it's easy to work with them. They have an uploader. You just throw up images that you've edited that you like the look of in Adobe RGB 100% JPEG, and they'll take a look at it on their screen and make sure that it looks good in their printer and send you the print. Now, you calibrate your monitor. So, I mean, you don't need to worry. If you're going to send it out to a lab, I'd rather go to a lab that does their own color management.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I agree. Bay Photo is probably the best out there. I used MPix quite a bit for a few years, and they were good too. Just anybody you use, make sure that you read through their instructions for what you need to provide them.
I've had
That's
bad luck with trying to use their profiles, anybody's profiles for their
mhm.
printing system to soft proof for someone else's printer. It's like 1 degree of separation. That's why I like working with. I'm sure MPix is good too, but Bayphoto, I just know they've got a color professional in there, and they've got a color managed monitor. And if you've edited on a color managed monitor and they're looking at it, they're going to do a good job making sure that they match up.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Haber asks, he said, I migrated from On1 to Lightroom Classic, but I continue to subscribe to On1. Are there any features or tools in On1 that you believe are more useful than those in Lightroom Classic? We can both answer that one.
My answer is I love the tools in Enhance. I have no issues with super resolution straight out of Lightroom.
In Lightroom.
Yeah. In Lightroom Classic, I use super resolution and it'll turn a 24 megapixel file into 96 megapixels and it does a masterful job of it. I think, Adobe had been sitting back and looking at what all these aftermarket companies were doing. And then, they said, here, 100 engineers, go make that happen. And like Adobe does, they did a masterful job of it. And the same thing with their no noise or denoise. Those are both in the enhance panel. You go photo enhance in Lightroom Classic, you can get to either one of those, and they both just are fantastic. I wouldn't use a third party anymore. There was a long time where I thought, DxO, Pure Raw version 1, then 2, and probably now 3 were the best out there. But I think On1 actually does a wonderful job, both with in enhancing resolution and doing no noise. Or no noise AI may be the best engine of all because it does it on the underlying raw file without creating a new one. It does it in the way that it demosaics your raw file and it's underlying all the edits. You can even do it after you've done a bunch of editing and it will just propagate through that raw file without creating a new one. But if you're working in Adobe, like Rick and I do, largely for the organizing power of Lightroom Classic, the built-in enhance that they've added to Lightroom Classic and that's in Photoshop are hard to beat.
Right. But I will say that one of the reasons you might want to keep using Photo Raw is for the effects panel.
Yep.
I mean, the effects are really great and their masking is pretty awesome as well. So you can go in and you can create a color enhancer filter or, some very specific, like glows and dynamic contrast, and you can mask it so that it's just on those areas that you want that to be affected. And I think that's great. I mean, that's one reason why I keep On1 around in my, because there are times when I want to go over there and do stuff. I wouldn't, yeah, I would not use no noise just because there's no need to do it. And you're going to end up creating a second file like you do in Lightroom anyway. So
if you're 100% on one.
Oh, if you're 100, yeah, if you're on one user, like Photo Raw is your tool of choice for everything. The fact that no noise is built right in the develop module and it doesn't create this new file I mean, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But
Obviously,
I wouldn't.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, but if you're a Lightroom user, I wouldn't send files out to On1 to do no noise and then bring them back into Lightroom. It's just, you're not going to see that much of an improvement, if any at all. I mean, I think they're all pretty damn good. So I had one other question about On1 this time. Someone was asking, like, if they were going to print from Photo Raw to an Epson printer, would they use Epson's print layout or the print engine in On1? To me, hands down, I would use the On1 print engine. You have to send a PSD or a TIFF over to the Epson print layout, and if you want to do any editing, you're doing a test print, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of files that you don't need, and the On1 print engine is fine. As long as you're using, printer-based or application-based ICC profiles, you'll be fine with that. So,
You know, I think that printing out of on1 is just fine, just like printing out of Photoshop is just fine. I personally, that's another thing I love in Lightroom Classic is the print module. It's beautiful. It works so well. And it's a joy to use. That's another thing that holds me to Lightroom Classic. Um, is it's the best laid out printing engine I've seen by far, and I'm very used to using it. So
mhm.
but on one's just fine. It works just perfectly well.
Yeah. The one other thing, and it's not on one specific, but this question comes up all the time, the sidecar files. One person said, on one has sidecar files next to each image in a file, while Lightroom consolidates sidecar data into the catalog file. And that's not necessarily true. Um, if you're using catalog folders and on one will save the editing data and the metadata in the catalog file. And in Lightroom, by default, Lightroom does not create these sidecar files, but you can do that, and I do that
And
because if something happens to my catalog, I at least have the editing information in that XMP file. Um, you know, I
uh,
tell
I,
people that they really should not be worrying about what's in a folder with their photos. You never should be going in there. And
if
um,
if if you're not storing the XMP data or some of the other files that on1 creates alongside your master raw editing files, then you're at the mercy of your catalog's health. If your catalog goes bad, you will have no information about how those photos, all those hours you spent on those raw edits, saying, I want the sky to look like this, and I want the foreground, and I want this mask. And particularly as we get into this more high level raw editing, where we don't need to be creating Photoshop documents and TIFF files and things, you're just writing instructions in that tiny little metadata file on here is how I want this photo processed. And alongside that is I want it to be 2 stars and color coded blue and have a flagged for pick and these keywords. That stuff all gets embedded in that metadata. If something went wrong with your catalog, whether it's on1, whether it's Lightroom Classic, whether it's some cloud-based, I don't, it winds up all of that information, all that work that you did is stored in that little tiny minuscule, unnoticeable from a hard drive capacity standpoint file as a backup. And if you had to recreate your catalog, you could do it. It would take time for the computer to comb through all those little files and apply all that metadata to all those images, but it's there. And I think everybody should be putting those sidecar files in. The other thing I think is that if you're a raw editor, your raw files, this is one of the things Rick and I are hammering home in the organizing course. It's going to be coming out very quickly. We keep saying that, but it's done. I just got to get it fully edited. It is that you should create an organizational structure that makes sense for you, not what Rick does, not what I do, but we talk about why we do it the way that we do it and give some pointers on how to design your own. And your photos should go in there, whether it's by year, whether it's by type of shoot, whatever it happens to be, and they should stay there. They should be in a hierarchy where those raw master editing files are sacrosanct and they don't move. Your editing software knows where to go to get them. Your organizational software knows where they're located. Their sidecar files live in there with them. You don't need to open those files in anything but your raw editing software. You're not opening it and playing around with them in the Mac Finder or the Windows File Explorer. You shouldn't be, because you could just mess things up doing that. You put them in there, you leave them in there, you edit them. And then if you want to share a JPEG on Facebook or print something from Bay Photo, you can export a 2000 pixel sRGB color space photo to share on Facebook. You can export a full resolution Adobe RGB photo to send off to Bay Photo. Those are throwaway, those are trash. It's as easy as clicking your master file in your editing software and saying export with all the instructions located in that sidecar file into this throwaway file to use for this purpose. Those are ephemeral. Those are to be
yeah.
used for whatever purpose. Your raw file is your master. It's like a piece of negative that goes in a special storage vault that you can create a print from. The prints go
Hmm.
out like birds to the wind. the master editing file is sacrosanct. You aren't moving it around. You're not changing it. You're not opening it in all kinds of different things. It sits there with its instructions backed up right beside it in that sidecar file. They're important and they don't
Yeah.
take any space.
And you can turn this feature on in the preferences for on one, as well as in the catalog settings in Lightroom. You can turn, save XMP data with your files. I agree with Hudson. This is something you just should do. Does it offend your, your sensibility that it's not just photos in that folder? I'm sure it does. It used to me, but I've been saved enough. And the other thing is, whether you're using on one or you're using Lightroom, the fact is that, and I've done this a number of times, I can take a photo that I've edited in Lightroom and take that raw file and that XMP file and send it to someone. They can open it up in Lightroom or Photoshop, and the edits that I made to it will be applied to that photo. It's a
Rick and I
great
do that a
technique.
lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I helped Harris with some edits on a really tricky file a long time ago, where it was just, so we just kept sending the XMP files back and forth. So they are really useful and they save you time. So
I will just quickly respond to Goran that and DC's chipping in too. Wow. That I do use backblaze. There's videos up if you type backup into YouTube, or the stuff I do about the Synology uh NAS systems. I talk about how I back up my system. I have everything on a very big drive. It doesn't matter whether it's a NAS, doesn't matter whether it's an external drive. I have it all there on a fast, big external drive that runs to my computer at a gigabyte a second. And then everything on that drive is backed up on big, slow, local spinning, cheap hard drives, a series of 16 terabyte hard drives. And those hard drives are backed up in the cloud to Backblaze. If anything goes wrong, if there's a fire in the studio, everything's up there in Backblaze. I could get it back. That's catastrophic insurance. That's all it is. I don't ever want to pull files off there just because I screwed up something in the studio. I've got a local backup of those on those big, slow spinning hard drives. And every night at midnight, those spool up and have a look at my master folders and see if there's changes and incrementally back that up. Then those get backed up to the cloud constantly.
DC says if you convert the raw file to DNG when you import it into Lightroom, isn't the XMP data embedded in the DNG file? I believe it is,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's still going to create an XMP file. I don't really see the value anymore in converting to DNG when I import into Lightroom.
Yeah, I don't use DNG files except for Leica, which uses them as their base file.
Yeah. And Gary says, well, can you just change now? And what about your old saved files? I'm assuming you mean the older XMP files. The Lightroom has a wonderful thing in the develop module called the history. And the history will walk you all the way through the changes you've made to your images. I use that all the time, and you can create snapshots so that you can go back to certain places in your editing process and get back to them rather easily. On one only has a history feature that is for that edit session. So, it's, you could save presets, I guess. So actually, that's not true. You can save a snapshot that will work over time, but it's not going to show you all of the things that you've done to your image. So.
If Gary's also talking about like the photos in his catalog from last year and the year before that and the year before that and year before that, if you just turn that feature on in Lightroom, and it will be in the background writing XMP files for all your old files alongside
Yeah.
them. So you'll just do that in the background as a background task.
Yeah. There'll be things like if you use LR time lapse with Lightroom to do to build complicated time lapse sequences, you need to turn that writing feature off because LR time lapse uses XMP to sort of go between Lightroom and it. but that's an easy thing to do. You turn it off and then it's done. And then when you're done, you just turn it back on. So,
Yeah. That's a
um,
good tip, Rick. I hadn't thought about that. I haven't been using LR time lapse enough lately.
yeah.
That's really, yeah.
And Rob asks, are XMP and the .xmp and .on one files simply different forms of the same thing, but for different software? In kind of a way, but Lightroom or On One actually uses XMP for metadata,
Use
and
both.
the .on one file is for the edits. So
Yeah.
technically, you'd need both of those if you wanted to send a file.
And you might go, oh, why would they do that? But the reality is it's a good thing because Adobe is the 800-pound gorilla, and the XMP file, if you're bringing files from Lightroom or if you move between the two at all, in order to see the
Yeah,
categorization stuff that you did in Lightroom stars and flags and that kind of stuff, you need that XMP file back and forth. So
yep,
having the same file format for everything but all the detailed raw editor language makes sense. They did that
yeah,
for a good reason.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, it's time. We've had a lovely week. Um, our next office hours, as I said, will be
17th.
the 17th of December, 10 a.m. Again, we'll just sort of take general questions. And, if you've got some piece of gear that you've got this year that sort of helped you photographically, you want to give it a call out, put that in the question as well.
Mhm.
And start thinking about your favorite image of 2024, because we'll talk about the that office hours in early January, where we'll sort of showcase a gallery of everybody's work from this year.
Maybe it would be good as a topic, we'll do general Q&A, but maybe it would be good as a topic to talk about honing your work down to what's your very best and strategies for doing that a
You
little
mean
bit.
portfolio?
Well, I mean, yes, or at least the proto portfolio. You know,
Okay.
I think people wind up with thousands of images and trying to sort of sort, well, what's my favorite and what's the best, and it's a good topic to have right before we do a best of the year um,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
gallery. And maybe you and I can run through some of our favorite images from all time and what's special about them. And we can, talk
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
geez,
I think the building a portfolio process, which I just finished, is a fantastic exercise. But I also think, just sort of trying to figure out how to get to your best images, how to choose it's an interesting process. So,
yep,
all right.
100%.
Well, we'll do that. I'll probably set that up tomorrow, the December 17th office hours. So, all right,
That's great.
everybody.
All right.
Well,
Hey,
thanks for
thanks,
hanging out
everybody.
with us.
Sorry about the audio issues. And it seemed like my internet's been throttling a little bit too. I don't know what's going on there. I have gigabit fiber, but who knows? All right,
Those
gremlins.
that darn fiber. All right.
Yeah.
And everybody in the States, have a great Thanksgiving.
You guys.